Hi, Mystery Recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a family comedy movie called Thunderstruck. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens by introducing our protagonist Brian, a 16-year-old boy from Oklahoma. He aspires to be a basketball player, but despite his best efforts, he has never made it onto his school's team, the Eagles. Thus, he's assigned to the towel and water boy position instead. At the moment, Brian is watching a basketball game featuring his idol, NBA player Kevin Durant from the Oklahoma Thunders. Kevin begins scoring point after point, which impresses Brian greatly. He therefore makes a promise to himself that one day he will dunk like Kevin. Following this, a motivated Brian goes to his backyard and attempts to dunk the ball himself, but he fails miserably every time and stumbles to the ground. This makes his sister laugh and she begins recording all of his bloopers. Meanwhile, Kevin is returning home from a successful match, but he's soon surrounded by a crowd of reporters and fans. He seems exhausted, so his agent Alan arrives quickly and rescues him from the crowd. In the next scene, Brian is seen at school chatting with his best friend Mitch. Suddenly, they notice a new student named Isabel walking down the hallway. Brian is immediately smitten and smiles at her, and to his surprise, she also smiles back at him. Later in the cafeteria, he continues to stare at Isabel, but Mitch warns him not to become obsessed with her, since everyone at school considers him a loser and a nerd. Thanks, Mitch. Brian argues that since she's new, she doesn't know that yet. He then gets up and walks toward Isabel, but just then, a bully named Connor plays a video on the cafeteria TV. In the video, Brian is attempting Kevin's signature dunk by jumping on a trampoline, but instead of the ball, his feet end up in the basketball hoop. The video causes everyone to mock him, leaving Brian deeply embarrassed. He immediately walks away from there, and Isabel seems to feel sorry for him. Later, at home, Brian lies in bed tossing a ball when his father approaches him. Noticing his gloomy mood, he inquires about what's wrong, but the boy doesn't answer. Dad then presents Brian with 2 tickets to a Thunders game, which instantly cheers him up. The two soon arrive at the match where Brian is overjoyed to see Kevin, scoring several points in the first half. During the break, the host announces that one lucky ticket holder will have a chance to make a basketball shot. Shortly after, the winner is declared, and it turns out to be Brian's father. But instead of achieving his lifelong dream, he selflessly hands the ticket to his son and urges him to go ahead. Brian excitedly heads to the court, where the host announces that if he makes the shot, he will win $20,000. The boy looks around and spots Connor among the audience, ready to capture the moment on camera. He then throws the ball, but it goes way off target and ends up hitting the mascot. Embarrassed, Brian starts to leave, but he unexpectedly comes across Kevin. The latter cheers him up and signs a ball to give him. Brian is overjoyed to meet his idol and says he wishes he had his talent. However, Kevin responds that hard work defeats talent when talent doesn't work hard. While saying this, he hands Brian the autographed ball, and a surge of energy passes between them. The next morning, we see Brian awaken from his sleep. He listens to the radio and learns that despite the Thunder's strong performance in the first half, they lost the game, with Kevin shooting 0 for 13 in the second. This upsets Brian, but he puts his disappointment behind him and gets ready for the day. In the evening, Brian and Mitch arrive at an amusement park where they see Isabel and Connor hanging out. Connor is attempting to win a large teddy bear for her by playing a hoop shot game. However, despite his numerous attempts, he is unable to score. This makes the boys burst into laughter, and Connor is enraged upon seeing them. He challenges Brian to take a shot if he can do any better. At first, our hero decides to leave, as he believes it's pointless to argue with the bully, but then he abruptly turns around and throws the ball, which ends up going in. Everyone is stunned by the shot, and they believe it's just a coincidence, but Brian proves them wrong by making several consecutive shots. After an infuriated Connor leaves, Brian approaches Isabel and hands her the teddy bear, making her very happy. The two then formally introduce themselves and leave the amusement park together, holding hands. Elsewhere, Kevin is practicing basketball but is having difficulty making shots. This frustrates both him and Alan, especially since Kevin's last match was a disaster. However, he insists that he's just going through a rough phase, and it happens to everyone. Meanwhile, Brian is practicing basketball at home, and to his surprise, his skills have improved dramatically overnight. The next day at school, the Eagles team is practicing when Brian arrives wearing a basketball jersey. The coach asks why he's in a jersey since he's just a towel boy, but Brian states that he wants to join the team. The coach initially declines, but when Brian continues to beg, he finally asks him to prove his worth. Brian then heads to the court and begins playing against Connor, who's the team captain. He demonstrates his abilities by easily scoring against his opponent, leaving everyone in shock. The coach also joins in to compete against him, but the boy defeats him as well. Impressed by his abilities, the coach decides to add him to the team.
What happened, Brian? You used to be garbage.
In the following days, Brian plays several matches against other schools, consistently leading his team to victory. This makes him a popular figure at school, and now everyone wants to be his friend. Brian also becomes closer to Isabel, and they appear to be in love. On the other hand, Kevin's abilities suddenly decline, and he ends up losing every match he plays. The media also begins to report on his downfall, which frustrates him greatly. Alan is deeply concerned and tries everything he can to help the player, but to no avail. He even brings Kevin's mother in hopes of motivating him, but it still doesn't help. One day, Kevin arrives for a basketball shoe advertisement. However, he struggles to run with the ball and can't make it to the hoop without stumbling. He then spends hours doing multiple takes, only to fail miserably each time. In the end, the director becomes frustrated and decides to fire him from the ad. The director also expresses his dissatisfaction to Alan, complaining about how incompetent Kevin has become. Later, a frustrated Alan watches a news report discussing Kevin's decline. While switching channels, he comes across a segment about Brian, who is now being hailed as a basketball prodigy and the next Kevin Durant. Alan remembers Brian from weeks ago when he failed to make a half-court shot during the Thunder match. He then watches a video of Brian's games and notices that his moves are strikingly similar to Kevin's. This makes Alan suspect that something happened that day, causing Kevin and Brian to swap abilities.
This is just like Space Jam.
Later, he meets with Kevin and shares his theory about Brian, explaining how they must have swapped talents that day. He reveals that Brian was once a towel boy for his school team, but is now suddenly the best player at Oklahoma State. However, Kevin dismisses the theory and assumes that Alan has gone insane. The next day, Alan brings Kevin to Brian's school under the guise of a youth program. He then introduces the two and encourages them to shake hands, hoping that their powers will be restored. Kevin recognizes Brian from the match, but Alan tries to pass it off as just a coincidence. He also suggests that they spend the rest of the day together since they're both into basketball. Brian and Kevin get along well and talk about their love for the game. They then eat lunch in the cafeteria, surrounded by many students. However, despite spending the entire day together, their abilities don't reverse, leaving Alan frustrated. The next day, we see Brian at his next match, where he is arrogant and refuses to pass the ball to his teammates. Although he single-handedly leads his team to victory, his friends are frustrated, as basketball is ultimately a team sport. Meanwhile, Kevin is also competing in a game, but he's still struggling to throw the ball properly. The public and the media begin to degrade him, claiming they have never seen anyone throw as poorly as he does. In the evening, Brian throws a party where he is surrounded and cheered on by many students. However, Isabel appears uncomfortable with the situation and his changed demeanor. She suggests that they go somewhere quiet and spend some time alone, but Brian refuses to abandon his new friends. This upsets Isabel, and she ends up storming away from there. Soon after, Alan arrives at the party and has a private conversation with Brian. He explains the situation and informs Brian about how his and Kevin's talents have unexpectedly switched. The boy refuses to believe it, but Alan questions him about how he thinks he went from a nobody to a superstar overnight. The man requests that he return the talent, but Brian refuses, as he doesn't want to give up on his newfound fame. Before leaving, Alan tells him that it's not fair to use someone else's talent like that and deceive everyone around him. The next day at school, the coach gathers the Eagles and informs them that they are only one game away from becoming Oklahoma State champions. As everyone rejoices in their impending victory, Brian takes a moment to speak with Isabel. He asks why she left the party early, to which she responds that he has suddenly become a different person after his fame. This enrages Brian, who states she only noticed him after he began playing basketball, but Isabel clarifies that she liked him the moment she saw him in the hallway. Later, while riding his bicycle around town, Brian notices a poster of Kevin. He feels bad for his idol, as Kevin has been performing horribly as of late, and everyone has started hating him. As a result, Brian decides to do the right thing, that is, to transfer his talent to the rightful owner. He then calls Alan and informs him of his decision. After a while, the two proceed to the basketball court, where Kevin is practicing alone. Brian and Alan attempt to explain the bizarre phenomenon to him, but he still refuses to believe them. However, when Brian demonstrates his skills and performs a special move that only Kevin could previously do, the player is shocked. The two then try various methods to swap swap the talents back. They even hold the same ball and say the same phrase they said that day. Unfortunately, all of their attempts fail, leaving the three of them frustrated. In the next scene, Brian arrives at Isabel's house and apologizes for his arrogance. Although she is still upset, she forgives him and invites him inside. Brian then explains everything that has happened and how his talents were swapped with Kevin's. Isabel finds it hard to believe, but he shows her the video from the day when it all started. While watching himself miss the shot and hit the mascot, Brian suddenly gets an idea and leaves the house. Soon enough, he arrives at the competition site where Kevin is playing in a match. He notices that the Thunder team is losing and has scored 0 points so far. Brian tells Kevin that he has figured out how to switch their powers back. He explains that he needs to knock down the mascot because that's what happened on that day. Brian then throws the ball towards a nearby mascot and knocks him down. After that, the two hold the ball together and Kevin wishes he had his talent. To which Brian responds, "Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard." At this moment, a surge of energy passes through them, indicating that their plan has worked. Soon after, the second half of the game begins, and Kevin begins to perform exceptionally well. He effortlessly scores point after point, astounding the audience, and all he had to do was drain the soul of a small child. As he leads his team to victory, Brian stands on the sidelines and feels happy for his idol. The next day, Brian is also competing in the Oklahoma State Finals, but he knows he's going to perform poorly this time. The game soon begins, and he plays clumsily just as he did before. This leaves his coach shocked, and he asks what's happening. Brian responds by saying he wants to be benched as he's not a good player, but the coach refuses, saying he can't bench his team's star player. Just then, Kevin and Alan also show up, which makes the boy even more nervous. Soon after, Brian recalls his idol's words about how hard work can overcome talent. He realizes they're losing because when he was a star, he used to play alone and ignore his teammates. Understanding this, Brian approaches his teammates and admits that since he's not playing well, they should finally play as a team and compete for every ball. They devise a strategy based on each other's strengths and resolve to win the game at all costs, even if it means breaking some legs and threatening some families. With renewed energy, they begin the game again, and most of Brian's teammates manage to score with less than 10 seconds remaining in the game. The Eagles are down by 2 points, and Brian receives the ball. He doesn't have time to pass, so he decides to shoot a three-pointer. Miraculously, the ball flies into the basket, and although those are Brian's only 3 points in the game, they turn out to be the winning ones. This victory secures the Eagles a spot in the state playoffs for the first time in 32 years. Who cares if they're obviously going to lose? In the aftermath, everyone carries Brian on their shoulders and chants his name. The movie comes to an end as Kevin waves goodbye to him and walks away with Alan, who still can't stop cheering because he's gonna be rich again. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.